Good morning. Very nice to be here. Thank you very much, Alan, for this kind introduction. Yesterday, you all probably saw the plenary session, and you saw some of the issues that we are facing here today in the United States, but that we in Europe have been facing for even longer, for the past 2 decades. But today I couldn't be happier to be with these very strong-willed individuals, women, and so I'll dive right into the conversation. Let me start with you, Ambassador Lipstadt. All of you, I think, and myself certainly included, have been following your career for a very long time. Recently, over the past years, you seemed very comfortable in your career as a professor. You were tenured with an endowment chair. You were writing, teaching, able to say whatever you want to do, write whatever you want to write, not having to worry whatsoever about getting any kind of clearance. Then you decided to go ahead and accept the position that you're in today. Now, it's certainly nice to be an ambassador, but I still wonder, and I'm sure many of you do as well, why did you decide to do it, and why did you decide to accept that post?
I'm still trying to figure it out. No. Not true. You're right. I was at the pinnacle of an academic career, teaching what I want, when I wanted, 2 or 3 courses a year. That's a full-time job, and saying what I wanted to say. Some people have asked me what's been the biggest change, and I said spontaneity. It's now something I see in the rear-view mirror, getting further and further into the distance. But to be very honest, and I think that, some people are asked, if they make a movie about your life, who do you want to play you? I've already done that, so you can't ask me that. But sometimes in a more sober, what epitaph do you want? And I think the one I want is, she made a difference. And when I was asked by the White House to put my name forward for this position, and I thought about it, and I said, I've talked the talk, but now I have to walk the walk. And it took me a little bit of time, but once I realized, and someone in fact said to me, Deborah, you have to do it, without knowing that you can make a difference with someone, but she said you could make a difference. So here I am, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm also delighted to be here at AJC, because as many of you know, I have a very long-standing, as Alan said in his kind introduction, relationship with AJC, but I have a special relationship with AJC, and I'm due 30 seconds of tribute.
Please do.
When I was sued by David Irving, the world's leading Holocaust denier, and I had lawyers working pro bono, but it was clear we needed a defense fund to pay for all the ancillary expenses which were mounting. David Harris and the AJC leadership, then lay leadership, heard about it, and without blinking an eyelash said, we're going to help. And they did, and they housed the defense fund. They helped raise funds. And then here, miracle of miracles, they didn't talk about it. They didn't publicize it, because my lawyers had asked, please keep it quiet. This man has such a perverse way of looking at the world that if he knew you have this fund, he's more likely to fight harder rather than to drop it. And not only did I get support from David and his lay leadership, who were terrific, just terrific, and I don't want to mention 1 or 2 because there were so many. At one point, the staff in the building heard about this, and they voluntarily raised funds to go to the defense fund. So, that was a chance to make a difference, and now I'm getting another chance, so I feel very lucky. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for reminding us of the history, and thank you for walking the walk.
Thank you.
Katharina, you have also been walking the walk. You have been an incredible voice against anti-Semitism, an actor against anti-Semitism. And I'm not sure that some of the progress that we have collectively been making in Europe over the past years would have been possible without you. And I want to be very, very clear in that. When you look at the future, though, at what is still left to be accomplished, what is it that you want, and what is it what keeps you up at night? I'm sure there are many things.
Yeah. Well, when I started this job 6 years ago, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And I mean, we had seen lethal attacks in Europe on Jewish communities, but really starting to meet with the Jewish communities across Europe and being in close touch showed how afraid in the end they were. And I think my wish is to ensure that Jews in Europe see a future for themselves, for their children and their grandchildren in Europe. And we must do everything it takes to do that. It is in this spirit that last October, for the first time, we put forward a strategy for the EU, where really the aspect of fostering Jewish life is at the heart. So of course we have to fight anti-Semitism, we have to prevent it, and these aspects are important. But ensuring that Jews can go about their lives in line with their religious and cultural traditions, which means, for example, not to have discussions about Shrita, not to have discussions about banning Brit Milah, and to ensure that we can find a political consensus on this is really the next step, because a lot has happened. There is a lot of progress in recognizing anti-Semitism, in making it visible, in action from governments and from the EU, but it's not enough. And I think I also would like to say how I actually met David.
Please do.
It was on the day of the terrorist attack on the airport in Brussels. We were supposed to meet bilaterally, and then we had to change the whole program because the government buildings were immediately locked down. I was not in it, so I was free to meet in a restaurant. We had to stay inside, so we spent 3 hours. I had to get my daughter from the kindergarten. She was also sitting there. And we spent 3 hours discussing what was really symptomatic and what also David had been warning for years and years. Yeah.
Deborah, let me ask you the same question. You just arrived in your position, but what does keep you up at night? What is it that you really
I think a number of things. First of all, the failure of so many people to take anti-Semitism seriously. The sort of, what are they complaining about there in this beautiful sanctuary? People with power, people with accomplishments, what are they complaining about? And of course, the answer is, I don't have to belabor it with this audience, is that we may not appear, not all of us, but many of us may not appear as traditional victims of prejudice, but we know things can change on a dime. And we also know that anti-Semitism, while a prejudice like other prejudices, has the unique characteristic of being a conspiracy theory. So things can change and can change subtly. And yet there are so many people, organizations, institutions, universities that just don't see it as a problem. And if anything, they think Jews are just rushing to get into the victim game. They just, the victim, as it's derisively called, I hate to even say it, but the victim Olympics, they just want that. And we know that that's not true. I mean, one example, think back to Weimar. None of us here are that old, but Weimar, Germany, the interwar governmental Germany, democratic, Jews thrived. and how quickly things changed. I'm not saying I'm expecting it to change in that same way, but what I'm saying is things can change easily. So one of the things is the failure to take it seriously. And that really terribly disturbs me. The other thing that disturbs me, and this part is my American perspective, but I think it also applies outside the world, is the failure to recognize, and Alan mentioned in his introduction about the Buffalo Killer and his so-called manifesto. You know, it's an insult to manifestos to call that a manifesto, but not that I'm a great fan of manifestos, but that, you know, that's a rabbit hole I'm going to go down. That certainly when it comes to racism, not only, but certainly when it comes to racism, anti-Semitism and racism are not contiguous hatreds. They're linked. Many of you know that I was an expert witness at the civil trial in the Charlottesville case, you know, the Unite the Right case. My report is available on the web at Integrity First for America. And what was so clear, you all remember on that first night when they chanted, "Jews will not replace us." My phone was ringing off the hook. It doesn't have a hook anymore, but so to speak. Kids don't know what it means, you know, when you say that. What hook? Ooh, ha. It's like dial the number. Dial? What are you talking about? Put a kid in front of the dial phone, they don't know what to do. But in any case, I had to explain to them replacement theory, not just as it emerges from France in the recent years, but going way back. Jews at the secret Kabbalah, it goes back to the protocols of the elders of Zion. Those elders sitting in a room in Switzerland, you know, conniving and using others to accomplish their goals. And it makes me very sad that when it comes, again, now I'm talking from an American perspective, and my remit is really outside the boundaries of the United States, but this isn't, I think you would see it in Europe as well, maybe in a different kind of way, the feeling that there's only so much bandwidth of sympathy. And if I'm talking about racism and someone says anti-Semitism, that cuts the bandwidth of sympathy for my particular group. And my argument is the exact opposite, and I think Katharina shares it as well, is that it's not that there's a limited bandwidth of sympathy. If you're going to take these hatreds, in this case specifically anti-Semitism, seriously, you have to recognize that they're part of the warp and the woof of hatreds. It's not to diminish the attention to one, but it's to say it starts, and we just say this, it may start with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews, and now we see it the other way. It may start with other groups, but it's going to end with the Jews. So that inclusiveness, that disturbs me terribly. And the failure to really understand, I mean, it sounds so ridiculous. You know, I know it when I see it, but that's not a good enough answer. How many people don't really understand? You see this in your work all the time. Don't really understand what oh, I was just joking. Oh, take it too so, you know, thin-skinned or whatever. But the failure to take it, to understand what it is, maybe I should reverse order. Failure to take it seriously, and failure to recognize how interconnected it is with other hatreds. And this even predates replacement theory, but it's certainly now that we see with white supremacy and white Christian nationalism.
Sure, go ahead.
If I may add something there, I think what we see increasingly is that anti-Semitism comes really from the center of society. And we have, for a long time, placed it into the extremes. Extreme right, you know, Muslim extremism, extreme left, all in different expressions, usually Islamism and far right being very ready for violence, the left slightly less. All three of them, of course, can agree if they don't like each other among themselves, but they can agree that the Jew is the enemy. And the real thing, I think, however, and they're so difficult to tackle, is this anti-Semitism that is in the middle of society and that we have seen surface in the pandemic to the streets. So if you have teachers wearing a yellow Star of David saying unvaccinated, it's not an extremist. It's people who have lost compass and who have this prejudice or lack also of understanding of the Holocaust and of what it means to distort the Holocaust and to trivialize the Holocaust. And now it expresses itself on the street. And then you have these casual remarks at work. You know, I mean, don't you want to pay the bill because you've got the money? You know, this kind of, and it's very common, unfortunately, in Europe, you know, to have these myths and very internalized, and they come out. They came out in the pandemic. I mean, we've seen this explosion of anti-Semitic content during the pandemic. Now, with the war on Ukraine and the propaganda coming from Russia, really using. Misusing and using the terms around also the Holocaust and Nazis and genocide. You know, we made a study or like a survey. There was a 200-fold increase of the word Nazi coming out of Kremlin sources in the months already before, and a 400-fold increase of the word genocide. So this is systematically prepared, and we see it now, you know, coming up through the web, but also obviously through action.
Simona will give me a hard time here, but
No, it's okay, it's okay.
But Katharina made 2 points here. The casual, like a student once came into my office, and she was very distressed, and I said, you know, can I talk to you about something slightly personal? I said, sure. And she was in a suite with 3 or 4 other women, and they had been randomly placed together their freshman year, but they had chosen to stay together for subsequent semesters. I'll give those of you with who have children or grandchildren or whatever you remember, they gave up better housing in order to guarantee their being together. So if you know the college campus, you know that's a big thing. I said, so what's the problem? She said, well, we were talking about what people were going to do during the break, and someone said, well, are you going skiing with your family? Are you going to go to someplace warm with your family or something? She said, I'm on work study. I'm the only Jew in the group, and I'm the only one on work study, meaning a form of scholarship. And she said, my family hasn't taken a vacation since my older siblings started to go to college. You know, maybe we go away for a weekend, maybe. You know, and there was this assumption, this person who knew otherwise, there was this assumption about them. So I told this to someone, said, well, that's not so bad. I said, but that's how it starts. That's how it starts. You get everything from the Kremlin leadership using overtly anti-Semitic, I mean, the idea that Hitler's mother was Jewish. Now, not only is it historically absurd, but what is he saying when he says that? Hitler's mother was Jewish, ipso facto Hitler was Jewish, so the Jews did it to themselves. There's deeper implications. Yeah. So, you know, you see this range of animosities.
So actually, so you spoke about the different forms of anti-Semitism, about the fact that it is now indeed in the center of society, and by the way, we clearly see it also in our AJC surveys that we've done in the United States, but also in Europe and France and Germany just very recently. But when I look at Europe, one of the difficulties AJC and others we have experienced, nevertheless, was first to get government leaders to acknowledge anti-Semitism in the first place. That was sort of the first decade, let's put it that way. And the second decade, in particular in Western Europe, was that it was difficult to get European leaders to understand and speak about anti-Semitism coming from within another minority group that itself is suffering from racism and discrimination. So what have you learned, Katharina, about this? What is it how can we address this new form of anti-Semitism, and how can we make sure that it's not being weaponized politically, because that is obviously always
Yes.
a danger.
Well, for us, there were two things very important. We said every form of anti-Semitism is equally pernicious, and no matter where it comes from. So, you know, that in connection with the so-called IRA definition, which doesn't have to tell you anything, but if it does, it's a definition that looks at the different forms of contemporary anti-Semitism in examples, from the racist to the religious to the myths and Holocaust denial, and also Israel-related anti-Semitism. And this, to have this as a basis was really key for governments to acknowledge that what we know from surveys as well, the vast majority of Jews sees as anti-Semitic is acknowledged as such. Because we would do this usually for other groups. We ask them, so what do you see as a discrimination or an insult? And we would use that as a basis. But when it comes to the Jewish community, we're always, yeah, but, you know, Israel, or, yeah, the Holocaust. You know, so this we made clear is unacceptable. So we talk about European Jews who are European citizens. They have a relationship with Israel in most cases, but whatever they are is, and wherever they feel threatened or discriminated against, is as a European citizen, and it's simply unacceptable. It wasn't easy, and we are not there yet. I mean, you know, the discussion continues, but nowadays we have a much greater acknowledgement, and unfortunately also because anti-Semitism is on the rise despite all the action. You know, the chief rabbi of Italy, he once greeted me coming into the room saying, "Since you've been appointed, anti-Semitism has exploded." You know, so I mean, there is really a lot.
I'm glad I didn't make that introduction.
But the acknowledgement from states is definitely increasing, and I think though one aspect I've learned is when you get politicians really to act, when they understand that it's not just a threat against the Jews. Yeah. That is a threat against our democracy, against our values, against liberty, you know, against our freedoms, is when this is understood, then action starts, and then things turn around. We may like it or not, but I think this is the reality. This is how we have seen it in the Council of the European Commission, where we have had 3 declarations now against anti-Semitism by unanimity by all 27 EU member states. And so there is a lot of, I think, movement going on, and member states and politicians in the EU are definitely more aware.
You know, just to build on what Katharina was saying, and next time the rabbi says that to you, you should say to him, but think how worse it would have been if I hadn't been appointed, you know. He's a nice guy, so we'll let him off. But when
I tease him every time I see him with that.
I'm beginning to get that. Some backstage, someone said to me, "You've been on the David Harris, I think, said it. You've been on the job 5 weeks. What's going on?" But what Katharina said about the threat of anti-Semitism to democracy, I want to boil that down, maybe take off my ambassadorial hat and put on my mortarboard, my professorial hat. You can take the girl out of the university, but you can't take the university or the teacher out of the girl. Anti-Semitism, I noted earlier, and you all know this, is a conspiracy theory. The idea is not, yes, Jews, you hear Jews are dirty, Jews caused the pandemic, all sorts of disgusting things, but also they're powerful. They're all controlling. The Jewish-controlled media, the Jewish-controlled banks, the Jewish-controlled government. The deniers just talk about, or the early white supremacists would talk about Zog, the Zionist occupation government. In other words, Jews are controlling all this. So if you allow anti-Semitism to flourish, this idea flourishes, and the outcome is a lack of faith in your political system, your financial system, your media, your institutions, because they're all being controlled. Well, if you have a lack of faith in all that, democracy is threatened. So that's sort of the offshoot that if you're an anti-Semite and you feel you can't believe it, we see it in conspiracy theories that are not anti-Semitic. There's an interesting way of looking at this, and I believe Yair Rosenberg in The Atlantic made this point, and we often make it, but he made it very succinctly, and I thought it was useful. He said, some conspiracy theorists are anti-Semites to begin with. So they look for, pandemic, the Jews caused it. Inflation, the Jews caused it. Some are not yet anti-Semites. But they look for someone or a group that is wealthy enough, powerful enough, conniving enough, clever enough, crafty enough, who has a history of doing this kind of things, and they end up as the Jews. And that's why when Katharina said it starts in the middle with just the assumption, you're rich, that's where it leads to. So anti-Semitism, look, it would be bad enough if it just hurt the Jews. You have a group of citizens in your society who are threatened. Your job is, one thing of the government is to protect its citizens. But it's not just that. It goes beyond that.
Now, I know that we have questions afterwards for the audience, but let me ask you two more questions, and I'll ask both of you the same one. Thinking strategically and not just situationally, what's in your mind the best way of fighting anti-Semitism? And maybe I'll start with you, Katharina.
She's been on the job longer, so.
Exactly.
You've analyzed it all. No, but I think one thing really coming from what Deborah just said about how democratic structures are weakened by this conspiracy myths and the thinking around it, we need to strengthen democratic institutions. So this, and this is also why sometimes fighting anti-Semitism is very difficult, because we address the symptoms, but the root really is to strengthen democracy and to strengthen the institutions. That, for example, means very concretely, if there are issues with slaughtering, where we have an issue in some countries that there is illegal slaughtering happening, rather than banning it, you need to have state authorities going there and saying, what you did is unlawful, here is your fine, and now go to a slaughterhouse and slaughter correctly. And as long, however, as we basically backtrack and the state then gives up and says, okay, we cannot control it, so we better ban it. And it's. I think this is one important aspect. And then, of course, the recognition, the understanding of how anti-Semitism plays out, and in particular also in Europe, anti-Zionism and Israel-related anti-Semitism, how it is totally unacceptable to have demonstrations in front of synagogues when there is a Gaza crisis going on, and to shout in front of synagogues, death to the Jews. That is unacceptable in any case, but to make this constant link is also problematic. And if the police then does not see this, or sometimes the police sees it, but the state prosecutor doesn't, that means we need to go through the structures, and we need a long breath. I know we don't have the time, but we still need to systematically go into training for state prosecution, for police. We need to be able to really make them understand how anti-Semitism is expressed today. And the third aspect, I believe, is really the internet. It's the number one entry door into our living rooms when it comes to hatred and anti-Semitism. So as I know the situation is different here in the States, but in the EU, we have now created legislation to ensure that platforms have to make their algorithms transparent, that they have to take down illegal hate speech, which is illegal according to European legislation, that they have to have better redress mechanisms, and they can be fined if they do not comply. So this is legislation with teeth, and we think that a highway of data needs to have rules, and therefore, the aspect of really having clear boundaries for what can be said in the internet, and really making the internet again a place where we all want to be. You know, we have sort of come to a situation where we agree, we don't agree, but we give up on saying, well, a certain amount of hatred always surrounds my Twitter account. But why? I mean, why do we would not want this in the real world, and what is illegal in Europe, again, in the real world, is also illegal online, so it needs to be prosecuted. And I think these are aspects that, you know, if we really crack down on these, there is a chance that we push back.
Again, just to add commentary, because some of you may not be fully familiar on the Shechita, on the ritual slaughter issue, and the Brit Milah, the circumcision issue, that there are countries, and Katharina has been dealing with this on the front line with her team, but there are a number of countries in Europe which are thinking of banning it. Totally. Now you could say, okay, ban ritual slaughter, you have to, if you're going to be a carnivore, you just have to pay more for your beef or something. But if you ban Brit Milah, if you ban circumcision, you can't take a baby who's 7 days old, so on the 8th day he'll be in a country where they allow circumcision. You're essentially saying you can't live here as Jews. And at the same time, these are countries that proclaim freedom of religion. So what was it? I forget which community you mentioned to me that said when this was being discussed, was it Denmark, that you rescued, some of the Jews there said, you know, offhand, you rescued us in 43 and now you're banning us in 2022, 3. And that's a real, and yet it's done, you know. Now, sometimes it starts as an anti-Muslim thing, but you know, it affects the ability to live, and yet you proclaim yourself as freedom of religion.
But let me ask you that same question. What is it? I mean, in the next few years that you have ahead of you, what is it that you want to accomplish, and how do you think? What is the best approach to fighting, you know, anti-Semitism?
At heart, I'm an educator. So I want people to try to get to understand what I said earlier about what it is and to take it seriously. But I also am so encouraged, and I know there is some good news. You came to a session on anti-Semitism and you heard good news. What's wrong with that statement? But there is good news. There are people like Katharina. We're going from here to the United States mission at the UN, where I'm hosting a meeting of a number of the special envoys, including newly appointed, who's here at a different session, envoy from the Organization of American States. Other countries are talking about appointing special envoys. That means they're taking it seriously. So that is, and I want to figure out, we all want to figure out, I mean, I'm convening the meeting, but we're all coming with the same agenda. How can we work together? How can we be a force multiplier? So I think that that's exceptionally important. The other thing that I hope to work on, the other piece of good news, is the Abraham Accords, which the State Department under Secretary Blinken, Biden-Harris administration is building on with great, great vigor, and to work with some of these countries which have been in the past purveyors of anti-Semitism, or look the other wayers of anti-Semitism. How can we turn this around? How can we change that? So I'll be putting out, or trying to put out fires, or calling attention to fires, but I also hope to create this, help create, it's already, it's not a new idea. My colleagues and other special envoys have been working together. They just met together in Jerusalem. But how can we regularize this? How can we be a force multiplier? And then also building on the Abraham Accords.
Thank you. Actually, the timing is perfect, I believe. I think there are microphones that could be, yes. So we will be taking questions from the audience. Please make sure there are actually questions.
They have that little squiggly thing.
And no comments. I know you hear that every single time, but I would like to ask you that. Go ahead. Don't, yes, stand.
Should we take them one at a time, or do you want to?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
That's a very tough issue. Anti-Semitism on the left is squishier, to use a highfalutin academic term. It's a little bit like whack-a-mole. But I don't know how many of you saw the map put out in Boston last week, linking all the Jewish groups, Jewish institutions, including a group, I think, run by the Orthodox Union, by the OU, that provides jobs for disabilities. But these are the groups, it was like a roadmap to hate. And this came from a left-wing, a progressive group. It's very hard, and it's one of the things that's making life uncomfortable for some students on campus. It's not the defining factor of their life on campus, but still, if they want to identify openly Jewishly, I mean, I've asked students, and they've confirmed that this is correct, where they used to maybe 5, 6 years ago proclaim, hey, guess what? I'm going on a birthright trip this summer, getting a free 10-day trip to Israel. Now they go, but they don't proclaim it. Because they just, it's too much hassle, it's too much trouble, et cetera. So it's a very difficult thing. I say doing it the same way, pointing out the hypocrisy. You've got to be willing, and I said this in my Senate confirmation hearings, that I see myself as an equal opportunity fighter of anti-Semitism. Simone talked about weaponizing anti-Semitism. You've got to be willing to call out the people with whom you agree on so many other things, and not just the people with whom you disagree. It's much harder to do on the left because it's framed within the human rights and all that kind of thing. You got to study it, know where the holes are in it. You can't just fight it with indignation, though indignation is certainly deserved. But it's got to be done very seriously.
Katharina, do you want to?
I think actually I don't like the term progressive in this context because I don't think it's the right term.
What is the right term, you think?
Well, I don't know. Definitely, it's not progressive. It's not progressing anywhere. I think that where we have been very clear with regards to, in particular, the discussions on campus, is that freedom of speech is there for everybody, and also freedom of thought, and what is unacceptable, and for example, in the UK, almost all universities have signed this IRA definition that I mentioned earlier, which looks in particular also at Israel-related anti-Semitism. And they have linked it to financing even, you know. So this, of course, the UK is no longer a member of the EU, but it can still serve as a good practice. And where we have been very clear is that it is fully unacceptable that when you have apartheid weeks or different other BDS activities on a campus, that afterwards Jews don't feel safe. They don't want to wear their kippah, or their mezuzahs are being taken off their dorms. It's totally unacceptable, and so I think it's also a question of being clearer in our public deliberations, although as Commission we don't have a policy because it's in the end a member state's decision and how they deal with this. It's university, so it's very much a member state remit. But to be clear on what it does to Jewish life, I think is very important.
But actually, let me and then I'll give it back to you. Just focus a little bit specifically on the issue of Israel-related anti-Semitism, because you probably all know this, many European countries have adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism, and indeed there is the specific added value is the fact that it gives very clear examples of Israel-related anti-Semitism and when the border is crossed. But what more can be done? It sort of feels that we've had this amazing success. You know, you have all of these countries that adopted the working definition, but what is it that can be done more? Is it that people don't understand what Israel-related anti-Semitism is, that can't identify it? Is because legal and public authorities don't know how to apply it? What is it that can more be done?
Well, I think one of the aspects is that we want a society free from anti-Semitism, but you have forms of anti-Semitism that are clearly illegal. When they are hate crime, hate speech in Europe, they are illegal. This is very often not the case when it comes to Israel-related anti-Semitism. It is yet anti-Semitism, it's poisonous to our society, and therefore we need to call it out. But that's more complicated than to address it by legal means. So, and I think this is why it makes it more, more complex to have a clear reaction. And then, as I said, it's also a question of the political, the governments and the political elite on how they react and what their own opinion is. And in Europe, mainstream can be quite critical of Israel. So this is more complicated, and therefore I think also on social media, for example, needs very smart counter-speech.
Many hands.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for a very enriching discussion.
Could you speak up a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you for a very enriching discussion. I am thinking about the anti-Semitism that occurs in private spheres. And one of the areas, which I think is true of both the US and Israel, are clubs, private gyms, private country clubs, where there are entry requirements and I mean, the kind of conversations that probably occur in the dining room, I mean, are things that are, out of government control. And the other aspect of that is that over the last years and decades, some of the European countries have allowed a lot of immigration from Arab states. And so there is a large community of people who don't necessarily adhere, even though it may be illegal, but they don't adhere to the laws about anti-Semitism. So I just wonder, and I also think that in Europe there are such clubs as well, and I wonder how you're dealing with these kind of walled-in societies.
Thank you. And actually we'll be taking more than one question. That way we'll... Schwab.
Good morning and thank you all. To understand anti-Semitism means you need to understand some of the bases of anti-Semitism, and a concept I have not yet heard mentioned here is that of Jews as germs invading the body. But yet I think that was the basic concept between the different treatment of anti-Semitism by the Germans. What do you do with germs when they invade the body? You try to eradicate them. Do you guys think this concept still holds? And if so, does that modify the approaches that you're taking in any way?
And we'll take one more.
Hi, my name's Joel Beich. Thank you very much. I'm wondering, especially to Professor Lipstadt, but also from Katharina's point of view, what can be done in the U.S. to eliminate our Section 230, which gives impunity to the internet publishers of hate speech and what have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Deborah, do you want to start?
Okay, first, Shrub, I can't forget that name, you know? In Hebrew, we say, Kishmo Kain Hu, like his name, so he is, but that's not the case here at all. Yes, that's very much there. Katharina talked about it in terms of the pandemic. You saw it in demonstrations in front of the Illinois State House with Governor Pritzker, you know, Jews as rats, Jews as spreading disease. It's very much there. It's exactly the idea, because it goes, you know, you had it during the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages, Jews poisoning the well, but it's also part of the conspiracy, because you don't see those germs, and suddenly you're sick, and the person who brought the germs is long gone. It's the Jew as devil. It goes back to Christian theology, really, and has moved well out just of the world of the church. And the distinguishing factors of the devil is A, the devil was the only one who could harm God, and B, the devil did his handiwork and was gone before you knew the devil had been there. So who does that fit in that sense? So yes, it's very much there. The question on the clubs, and in my book on anti-Semitism here and now, I talk about salon anti-Semitism or dinner party anti-Semitism. And you know, we've all been there where someone makes a crack, and maybe you're the only Jew at the table. And you don't say anything because you don't just know what to say, and of course you think of the precisely terrific answer at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, you sit bolt upright in bed and you say, that's what I should have said, you know. But we can't just let it go by. Now, it doesn't mean you have to say, personalize it. You can personalize it, but you've also got to be aware, and it calls for, going back to the question of the left-wing anti-Semitism, et cetera, you got to think about what it is you're going to say and not just give the person the excuse of saying, oh, they're so touchy, you know, that kind of thing. But you've got to call it out. You've got to call it out. Would you say that about other groups? That's a vast generalization. I didn't know the Jews were the only ones who want to save their hard-earned money. I mean, I had a friend that once happened to. She was with a group of graduate student friends, none of them Jews. They had been together for 4 years. They went out for they were here at Columbia. They went out for an end-of-semester sort of brunch. It's because when I tell you the story, you'll see it dates me a little bit. The story's old. And one of them said, oh, what were they going to miss about New York? Because all of them, except my friend, the only Jew, traditional Jew, et cetera, whose parents lived here in New York, had opened the home to these girls. They'd come for Seder. They'd sometimes say, I have nothing to do Friday night. Can I come for Shabbat dinner? This is from someone from the Midwest who never knew a Jew. You know, so this woman, one of the women who non-Jewish women there, said, oh, what I'm going to miss about New York is all the places you can get bargains. And then she turned to my friend and she said, and you're really going to be interested in this. I found a store in the Bronx which has clothing with labels still from Lord & Taylor, and she said the changing room is a madhouse, Loehmann's, you know. But the point was, you know, and you can save all this money and get these great bargains. But she said to my friend, you're really going to be interested in this. And my friend, who's very quick, said, I didn't know Jews were the only ones interested in saving their hard-earned money. And the girl got it. But that was not at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's a difficult thing.
Katharina.
Maybe just to add with regards to the Muslim population that has come to Europe, indeed, we see that among many of the recently arrived Muslims, in particular from Arab countries, and not only Muslims, by the way, it doesn't matter. If they are Christians, it's more the cultural aspect that is of importance there. Their prejudices against Jews and against Israel are about 2 to 3 times higher than general population. So this needs addressing, and it needs addressing, and that's why we have, as one of the actions of the 70 actions that we have in our strategy, also work with social workers and training, to ensure that they themselves can transmit that Jewish life is part of Europe, and therefore the prejudices you hold, you have to rethink them. The other aspect is, though, what do these people find when they get into European society? Is there someone who calls this out? Is it when they open the newspapers or the internet, for that matter? What is it they find? Does it confirm their prejudices? And I think this is a part of the problem. In mainstream society, you don't necessarily have this reaction, and so therefore, we have seen tendencies in the far right in Europe to blame the Muslim population of imported anti-Semitism. In fact, the Holocaust happened in Europe without imported anti-Semitism. It was our own anti-Semitism that had grown there for 2,000 years. So while there is a problem and it needs addressing and it needs clear addressing, we shouldn't try to fight anti-Semitism on the back of, and as Simone said, the weaponizing of anti-Semitism on the back of another community.
And again, to build on that, and yet when they come and they hear the anti-Semitism in the mainstream society, it confirms their own beliefs. But it's very much a European product in this case.
I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, and then we'll have to... I'm not the one... Yes, there's... Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name is Nati Pressman. I'm from Canada. Firstly, I just want to say thank you. You're both like amazing inspirations to me. My family in like Cologne on my dad's side, so they experience a lot of anti-Semitism. My question is, how will you both encourage better dialogue between different Jewish communities within the States and also within Europe to help combat anti-Semitism by hearing our different perspectives and how we've dealt with it in our own ways? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another mic? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Ambassador Lipstadt, my daughter was one of your students at Emory, and she'll be very excited that I saw you today.
Did she do well?
She did well, and she loved you. She always talked about you.
What's her name?
Her name is Gina Gitlitz. Okay. I want to know whether this problem that we've had in the Congress of dual loyalty and using that concept of dual loyalty to describe Jews, that they're not necessarily just loyal to the U.S. but to Israel. Is that a problem in Europe? And Ambassador Lipstadt, is that something that we can address in Congress? I mean, the quote, squad has been using that concept for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Katharina, do you want to start?
Yes, so with regards to dual loyalty, indeed, I mean, all anti-Semitic prejudices that have existed for the last 2,000 years have just simply mutated, still exist, and live on. So we see it in a way when we have these demonstrations in front of synagogues when it's really about Israel. So the idea that European citizens are more loyal to the state of Israel than their own, or when employers once they find out somebody is Jewish, put them on a different desk because they think, who knows what kind of contacts they have with the Mossad. I mean, all the absurd ideas that are out there. That's definitely something that we need to repeatedly make clear with regards to the loyalty. It goes back to Dreyfus and before, and it is not something that can go away easily. But it again needs calling out. And as a non-Jew, I can say I think this is when it's about calling out. Of course, as a Jewish community. You need to react as well. But above all, it's for the non-Jews, it's for all the others, to speak up and to defend. And I think this is the key responsibility really of a society. And here, Europe can learn something from the US, that civil society needs to be in solidarity, and I know at the moment it's also challenged here, but certainly in the past we've looked to the US for a reaction from within society when there are issues, and that can be individual conversations or it can be larger attacks. And the question back there, what was it again?
I have a question.
So the working to I mean, my personal opinion is we, as institutions, we don't organize civil society. Civil society has to organize itself, including the dialogue between them. However, what I started immediately after I was appointed is to call for a round table in Brussels with the umbrella organizations that are there. There are about 15, and to invite everybody for a regular exchange every 3 months. And so when I started, there were at least 3 organizations who said, if this one's coming, I'm not coming. So I said, well, I'm here, and whoever comes, comes. And in the end, of course, all came because they wanted to be part of the debate. And what we found, and I think they found also, they always they give me the credit for bringing them together, is that they work very complementary. There is unfortunately enough anti-Semitism out there for everyone to fight it in their own ways.
Very true. Last couple of comments.
On the dual loyalty, it's been called out. Members of Congress, and you talked about the squad, et cetera, it's called. People have called it out when, I don't like that term, but when there have been those kind of comments, it's been very vigorously called out, including by the speaker. And your next head of your organization, my good friend Ted Deutsch, will certainly know how to deal with that and know how to address that. You're losing a good leader, but you're getting a good replacement. I don't know if replacement, but you're a good successor. So hats off to you for your good taste.
Thank you very much. I think you will all agree that while the situation is serious on both sides of the Atlantic now, in Europe and in the United States, that we are concerned, that we are, of course, as AJC, as an advocacy organization, continues to be very committed in fighting anti-Semitism. But I think you will all agree that we are also particularly lucky to have 2 so thoughtful, smart educators, but also fighters and doers, because analyzing, talking is interesting, but what is much more important these days is to actually walk the walk. So thank you very much for your...